Now to Chile, where residents confronted hours-long lines at grocery stores and gas stations in the country's capital of Santiago following a weekend of violent protests. At least 11 people were killed amid the clashes, arson attacks, and looting throughout the country. The protest began peacefully on Friday after a hike in transportation costs, but quickly turned violent. This prompted President Sebastián Piñera to declare a state of emergency in several cities, putting the military in charge of security. Joining us now is Michael Szanto, a foreign policy expert. Michael, welcome and great to see you as always. When you hear, of deadly protests taking place in South America, Chile won't be the first place to come to mind. It's one of the more stable countries in South America, or economically successful. So what's really happening there? Why are they protesting? Is it really all about public transport costs?
Well, no, of course not. And I totally agree with you. It's like the last country you think of. It's very prosperous. It has a free trade agreement with the United States, one of the only countries other than Colombia and Mexico, I believe. Mexico, of course, part of NAFTA. It has to do with the inequality. It has to do with people feeling that they've been left behind. Statistically, Chile is a country with one of the greatest levels of inequality between rich and poor. So that seems to be a force behind this.
And to this point, one of the characteristics of these protests, Michael, is that they're led by the youth in the country. You see young people, students there from the middle class who want a change. But the more violent these protests get, do they risk losing public support? Have they already lost it?
Right. I mean, yes. I mean, I think that a lot of people are very turned off by the violence, but it's part of a bigger thing that we're seeing across the world, even in some of the most advanced countries, even in the United States, that the free trade, free market policies that were symbolized, I've said this before on this show and on this channel, by Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, people have turned against. And that's part of even Donald Trump in the United States, that people turned against, NAFTA, for example, was the brainchild of Ronald Reagan. So there are people who are left behind who are either lost jobs that they used to have, or they feel like the distance between them and the wealthy are growing, and then they're turning against the system. And, I believe in free market, free trade, so I think that they can undermine their own country's economies as a result.
We've been showing images as you speak. Santiago, it really looks like a war zone. What has been the government's reaction to these protests?
I mean, they're trying to control the situation. They're trying to prevent it from getting inflamed. And it's a sad story because, as you said, Chile really has been a success story, greater in some ways than any other country in Latin America. It's very sad to see. I hope it doesn't get out of control. I hope this is a self-limiting thing. The government has an opportunity to reach out to some of the people who are upset and frustrated and try to make reforms or concessions that we've seen in other countries that face similar things. So I'm hoping that this is a short-term thing and not a major setback or an opportunity for maybe them to reach out to people and institute reforms that make them happier.
You're right. What's happening in Chile resonates the protests we saw in Ecuador over fuel subsidies. We saw it in Argentina against the government's budget cuts. So should we consider all of it to be part of a bigger wave of anti-austerity measures in Latin America? Pro-equality?
Well, a little bit in a global sense, even in France, the protests there that turned violent. But yeah, Latin America has been a major setback. We're seeing that extends beyond Latin America, where things had turned more democratic, more capitalist. There's been a major backlash. And I think in terms of Samuel Huntington's waves of democracy, where there's usually a wave that goes in another direction. And democracy sometimes is correlated with liberalization of markets where you become more capitalist. And then there's this unfortunate backlash.
I think it's somewhere the balance between, seeking equality and wanting freedom. If you put Venezuela on one scale and then Chile on the other side of the scale, yeah. But remember, Milton Friedman said that a society that puts equality before freedom will get neither. A society that puts freedom before equality will have a higher degree of both. Michael Szanto.
I totally agree.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.